What we're moving on to now is looking at public and volunteer engagement. Now, one thing I saw at Burning Man this year was an incredible number of quadcopters and multiple rotor aircraft. This means that we're seeing a surge in citizens not only providing social media data, but actually beginning to fly their own assets. Now we're talking about public and volunteer engagement in a world where there's leakage from the information world that we're talking about, this virtual world, into the real space. First off, I'd like to get the other panel up here. Come on, guys, and we'll set you guys up.
John, there's been a change in the panel, so just wanted to announce that Sarah Jane Farmer from Crisis Commons Crisis Mappers will also be joining us on that panel.
Crisis Mappers Standby Task Force today.
Standby Task Force today, yep.
I'm the only Standby Task Force person here, so. Hi.
So one of the things we're seeing as the rise of these new sensors is also the rise of the number of hats that people wear in their various organizations. I think many of the folks that we're in, as we engage these crowds, come on up and we'll sit down. We're having to figure out how is it that we connect with people whose organizations are virtual, are not necessarily incorporated, are providing assets that are going into the space that traditional responders are working in, and are providing information that's actually causing different perceptions among the population, and ways in which, I should say, and we're searching for ways in which agencies can begin to catalyze behaviors that might lead to better responses using this tool. At the same time, there's a risk that these could also have issues in the ways that the response goes. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Ali Khan, who former Assistant Attorney General and is now at the CDC. The floor is yours.
Thank you kindly. So I'm going to have to figure out how to weave in having their own assets flying around into my opening comments here, but I'll work on it in the next. I'm gonna work on it while I go through some points I wanted to make. So thank you everybody for the opportunity today. I'm the Director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response at CDC, and I probably have the best job of everybody in this room. My job is to support CDC, the interagency, state and local partners, and private partners in their mission to ensure that this nation is secure from all public health threats. What I'd like to do, I was given about a handful of minutes before I open up this very distinguished panel, to talk about some of our CDC-related activities in the social media space, and then hopefully from the discussion learn from you how we can take our activities to engage the public to think more broadly about citizen engagement. Things have changed a lot for me. So I've been at CDC for about 25 odd years. Showed up there right out of my residency, and I have to tell you, I come from a field perspective here. I've spent most of my career in the field investigating Ebola outbreaks, Rift Valley fever, Marburg, South America, Africa, the Middle East, etc. So back in 2001, let's use that as a framework given what's going on the last couple of days and the anniversary 2 days ago. We didn't have an emergency operations center at CDC. So for the 2001 anthrax attacks, what we did is we took a conference room like this, put a bunch of tables together like you did, and that was the CDC Emergency Operations Center. We've come a long way, needless to say, since then. We now have a state-of-the-art Emergency Operations Center, and it spends a lot of time looking at real-time information, surveillance, disease monitoring information from over the world. And our Joint Information Center, sometimes I believe we set up the Emergency Operations Center at CDC for no other purpose than setting up the JIC, or the Joint Information Center. You can do all the good work you want, but if you're not communicating well with people, you might as well not have done it. And often it can get misconstrued as being poorly done. But we monitor real-time social media to see what we need to respond to. CDC itself, as most of you, hopefully everybody knows, we maintain a Facebook page to share information. We're the second most active Twitter feed in the US government, and we monitor it very closely to try to understand what the community is saying. It's from monitoring that Twitter feed during the tsunami that the Japanese, God, dreadful tsunami, earthquake, tsunami, and then the Fukushima Daiichi event, that we actually ended up doing a media campaign around zombies. But I'll talk about that later during the question-answer session of how Twitter links into that. And then we've also recently been using LinkedIn to try to work with our partners and health security partners to understand what we need to do in this community. So social media has really been allowing us to track sentiments faster of what's going on, doing it real time, and providing providing a direct channel to the public in a way that we'd never previously have been able to do so. And we now routinely do this for emergencies. I'm thinking about Hurricane Isaac just a couple of weeks ago, very quickly Twitter messages going out to the public on CDC emergency Facebook page. How do they connect with us? And I want to thank all of our partners who retweet our messages. We try to retweet your messages to try to make sure we have a consistent message in our community of what we would like people to do. And this isn't just about CDC, so you've heard from lots of partners earlier today, and you'll hear about some more later this afternoon. But I want to sort of call out a few people in the federal government. FEMA, and we have a FEMA representative here, right? You are blessed with some of the best leadership I can imagine between Craig and Rich Serino there. And after the 2010 Haiti earthquake, they really understood during that after-action report the greater role that social media and technology plays in our disaster. So we have some individuals here who are actually part of that response. And people were texting where they were on their cell phones. So a different way to think about getting information from people. And so they have now changed their whole FEMA site, mobile site. Anybody go to a good old government website, we love the organizational charts and our strategic plans and everything. That's not what somebody wants during a disaster, right? They want some low-band information. Where do I go? What do I do? How do I sign up for assistance? And they get it. That's what you can do now at the mobile FEMA site. The other thing is FEMA has always brought in these big trucks so that you could get on a landline and talk to people, because obviously their house has been destroyed and you don't talk to people anymore. So what they were finding was that there were 1,000 people scattered around the 2 outlets to plug in their cell phone chargers. And so now what shows up is actually large trucks that do nothing but allow you to plug in your cell phones, because that's what the people's needs are. So it's a nice example of being responsive to the needs of the community. Our Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Dr. Nikki Laurie, has also embraced social media in a big way with a couple of new apps that allow people, I think one's called a Lifeline app and the other one's called a Be Ready app on Facebook, as a way to allow people to use put their emergency contact lists together based on their Facebook friends. So they've embraced it a lot. And then I know we have an American Red Cross representative. Did we not have an ARC representative? I thought I saw somebody on the agenda. ARC has also very aggressively been thinking about this space, so I'm glad I can call them out since they're not here to call themselves out. They're doing a couple of interesting things. One is monitoring social media feeds, and the other thing is digital volunteers. So you can actually get a digital hug these days, a one-to-one from a volunteer based on what your needs are. So it's nice to see this work going on in this space. Moving forward, I think there's a lot of opportunities here, and in a number of different ways. One is how people share information and what they're willing to share. So some of you may be aware of the quantified self movement. Asthmopolis is my favorite example. This is an FDA licensed device that sits on the top of your asthma inhaler. And so the information goes to, so asthma is about 5% of the US population. And so every time you click this thing to take your 2 puffs of albuterol or whatever, a message goes to you onto your cell phone. It goes to your doctor so the doctor can manage your care. But it also goes out into the web, wherever that is. And so now people have access to this information. So epidemiologists can use this to think about monitoring asthma in their communities. City planners can use this to say, why does all the clustering seem to be in this area? So it's interesting what people will share with themselves. This is also true with wearable devices now. So you can have a device that you wear that will act as essentially an EKG machine for you, and that information people are willing to share broadly with the community. So you can sort of individualize public health. These smartphones will soon have little microscopes on them, diagnostic testing, everything. I mean, it's going to be about individual public health. And that sort of gets me to these helicopters flying around with images on them. This is additional information that people are collecting, not only for their own purposes, but they want to share this information and allow you to use this information if you know how to use this. Something that we're thinking about doing, and I'm looking for input from this audience, is thinking about a crowdsourcing platform as sort of a single trusted source for information during emergencies. That happens natively right now. You know, I was on during Isaac, I went to the CNN website, and there was, if you want to send us pictures of what's going on, send it here. And so, but how do we sort of coalesce that into potentially a single space that people always know, let me go to this space and this would be monitored by the community. So I think there may be some things we can do there. So let me talk a little bit about the challenges for this for public health. So, and there's a couple of challenges because communications traditionally in the government sense was not set up to think about how we communicate people with now. Sort of this two-way communication and the way for people to communicate with each other. So everybody here with an L in their first name raise their hand. How many people do I get? That's only 4. So 4? No, keep your hands up. What about M? How many more do I get? 4. Okay, I got about 8. Okay, that's it. That's so as far as OMB is concerned, that's my crowdsource because 10 or more, I need to get OMB approval for research, and that's going to take me 6 to 9 months. So I can crowdsource all I want with 8 to 9 people. So, again, we need to think a little bit differently in the federal government, at least, on how we can immediately crowdsource. I maintain a blog, and I wanted to do something so simple. We were thinking about saying, just have a little vote button there. Yes, no, or what do you think is the best approach? And I was basically told, you can't do that. That needs OMB approval to do that. And I go, gosh, when I go to TMZ every day, there's all sorts of voting on that site. And I want to be careful here and not just be facetious. There's a purpose for deliberate considerations within the federal government. So, for example, we are now trying to get input from the public about what do they think about H1, about research using avian influenza viruses. That makes sense to put in the Federal Register and broadly get people's input and allow people to to allow everybody in the community who would like to, regardless of having a cell phone or being plugged in or whatever, to tell us what they think about expanding research on avian influenza viruses. But there's some things where people share information with us that need to be thought of a little bit differently. So what I'd like to do now is turn over to our very, very distinguished panel to talk about some of how we will interact, how social media will change, has already changed and will continue to change how we interact with disasters. Shall I get you to introduce yourselves, or would you like me to do so? Let's do introductions. Go ahead.
Do you want me to do my session next?
How about just quick introductions, and then we'll give you all about 5 to 10 minutes, and then questions.
I'm Laurie Van Leuven, formerly with the City of Seattle for 12 years, where I worked in operational emergency management on the front lines. And then I spent a year working within FEMA headquarters as a fellow from the Naval Postgraduate School. And I'm now working on a research project I hope to tell you a bit about.
Thanks, Laurie.
I'm Jen Ziemke, and I'm the co-founder and co-curator of the Crisis Mappers Network, a fellow at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, assistant professor at John Carroll, and a volunteer for Standby Task Force.
Hi, I'm Jeff Phillips. I'm a volunteer local emergency manager in Los Ranchos to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I muddle in the social media emergency management realm.
Hi, I'm Sarah Farmer, and I got about 2 minutes notice that I was on this panel. So I've spent about 20 years working on situation awareness systems for basically military systems, so I know a fair bit about it, including things like UXV design. So the quadcopters is wonderful. And then 2 years ago, Haiti happened. They were looking for people who could lead bar camps. I put my hand up, and I've been doing it ever since. That took me into the UN for a bit, and I've just started my own company with some other UN escapees. Now, I'm not here as me. Now, the confusion about who I'm actually with is because I'm with pretty much every crisis mapping group on the planet. So today, I'm Standby Task Force because we have no other Standby Task Force representatives in this room, which is a shame. We also have Humanity Road over there. Andrew, stand up, Crisis Commons. Wave. No? All right, we do have Crisis Commons in here. I know we've got Tweak the Tweet in here somewhere. Have we got any OpenStreetMap people? Cool. These are people you can ask about what it's like at the pointy end of dealing with large floods of social media and trying to make sense of it. So that was me and hopefully a few other people to talk to.
Okay, so to be fair here, we won't start with you. We'll start with Laurie, who'll give us 5 minutes, and by the time we come to you, you better make that pointy end real pointy for your 5
I got it.
minutes. Okay, you got it?
3 minutes, I'm
3
still
minutes.
3.
Go ahead, Laurie.
So I consider myself to be somebody who wears the operational hat. It just comes from working, at the local sector for quite some time, working in emergency operations center, being part of the situational awareness group or planning sections. And I had the opportunity to come and work with FEMA for a year, and this was after studying social media, and that's where I did my research when I was at the Naval Postgraduate School, looking at social media during emergencies. So it's a passionate area for me. When I was within FEMA headquarters, I got to see a whole different layer of government interaction, not so much at the local level where you are directly looking at individual citizen needs, but at the federal level where there is far more moving pieces of coordination aspects happening. So I kind of have a good opportunity to look at different layered approaches, and when it comes to pulling in and listening to information from the public or from unofficial sources that are not internal to any of those current systems or structures that we're used to working with, there's a lot of fear and hesitation from the communities that are trying to do, in their best examples, trying to listen and monitor for those. Some of the things that have been talked about quite a lot here are utilizing the public as sensors, and that is really what we're talking about. We all know that we're in very challenging economic conditions where our resources are stretched very thin. Magnify that by tenfold or even more during an emergency. So our ability to be trying to sort and filter and get a lot of information verified during times of a disaster is very challenging, and it really shuts down a lot of local emergency managers' abilities to figure out how to find the path forward in that atmosphere. But what better opportunity do we have to utilize these free resources of people with smartphones and capabilities to snap a photo, to take a video, to type out quickly an eyewitness report of what they are actually seeing, than by mobilizing them in the field and finding some mechanism that we can pull that in and have some level of comfort that there has been some type of vetting that can occur that we can listen to. Technology exists that's available out there, but we need to do a better job talking with the public, creating these mechanisms and giving them examples of how they would like to utilize or how they could provide that information. I sometimes show a slide when I talk with folks that shows an example of a YouTube video that captured some type of a road closure where there had been a landslide and some of the road had eroded or had been damaged, and there were fiber optic lines exposed, versus another Flickr photograph that I've came across that shows a tree leaning on a power lines, and the description was so vivid of, this is the worst damage in our neighborhood from Hurricane Irene. It happened on this date at this time on Broadway and 30th between 31st and XYZ Street, and this shot was taken at this time showing these power lines. Now, we obviously see that the public has the capability. So number one, do they have the capability to provide information that's useful to us? Yes, they have the capability. Have we built a mechanism that we can make sure that arrives to us in some manner that then we can use it as actionable information, as information that is valuable, while there's all sorts of additional information accumulating rapidly that might have to do with emotional issues or feelings of empathy or sympathy, which are very valid and appropriate uses for social media because it has to do with active coping mechanisms. But we in emergency management need to filter those out and listen specifically to actionable pieces of content. So we've got some work to do in how we can build a system to receive that information. Another thing I'd like to also advocate for is, as challenging as we all recognize that it is to filter and try to listen to the right kernels of nuggets of information out there, it is just as equally difficult for members of the public. So if we're pretty savvy, those of us in the room, of where to go to, where some of these resources might be aggregating, and how to use a hashtag, and how to look and customize our searches so that we can listen and monitor it, imagine the public that in the midst of a crisis is dealing with a lot of stressors about who should I be listening to, where do I get the best information, you know, where is that one-stop shopping center? Where's that one place that I can go to without having to follow tons of different friends, or follow, you know, tens and hundreds of different agencies that have a small piece of that situational awareness? You know, where is that community discussion where I can just go there, I can listen, I can contribute, I can be participatory in that discussion space? And so that's really what I have been working on. You know, looking at my personal experiences working in emergency management, looking at a lot of the strategic challenges and how we're grappling with how to move forward in this space, and then trying to come up with a concept or an idea for how we can have a forum, some type of a web portal where we can pull in and aggregate official information, but we can also accept unofficial information that either come through direct citizen uploads of content or reports, as well as pulling in and filtered data that's occurring naturally within hashtag conversations, or with keywords, or that are all have some type of a geotag that we know is within that nexus location, geographic location of where the incident occurred. And in my concept of what I'm working with now with some technology developers is to come up with this credibility rating that's based on algorithms, so that things that come in from an official source might come in with a predetermined 50% rating, and things that come in from an unofficial source have 0% credibility rating. But then how the public reacts to it once it's on that forum, how they interact with that. Are they upvoting it? Are they agreeing with it? Are they echoing those reports that are showing up? Doesn't matter if they're from an official source or an unofficial source. What does the crowd think about that? Let's activate, let's utilize them as the sensors in the field that might provide content. Let's also get them to help verify that content. Let's add that, let's give them comment fields so that they can clarify. Well, somebody reported that a bridge collapsed. Well, somebody else might say, well, no, not really. It's damaged. There's a crack at the base and they've shut it down. So you can start seeing, we might actually get that social commentary and those layered approaches of content that will give us a better sense of what is actually happening and what that situational awareness how it might be even more useful to us. So this kind of credibility rating, it's challenging. These are really new places we haven't forged before, but seeing that we're always looking for that trust. How do we build the trust? How do we have credibility? So let's start influencing the technology now to close that gap. If that's what we need to be able to utilize and listen to that information, then let's start building that technology. So I would encourage anybody who is interested in my project. I've got a prototype site that we've built in a lab environment, but I need stakeholders. I need really smart people. We're trying to also have crisis mapping, heat maps be another way to visualize content that is aggregated as well. So.
Thank you, Laurie. That was excellent and nice description of the concept of active bystanders, sort of a different way of thinking about citizens. Jen?
Yeah, thank you. What I'd like to do with my 5 minutes is at least lay out an idea for a community brainstorm, which could take place later, of course, and 5 minutes is tough. But the brainstorm would be around this core issue. I think Kate Starbird got me thinking about this morning when she was starting to talk about disaggregating when we think about crowdsourced communities into the sort of crowd in general. and then expert sort of volunteer technical communities, however that might be framed. And I often like to think of these things as actually more slippery, right? Because depending on where you as an individual are, you're sometimes an expert in that community, and sometimes you're just a member of the crowd sitting at a football game, right? So I think there's a way in which everybody is an expert in their own right, knows something about where they grew up or the language that they spoke as a first language, et cetera. So, but without getting down too far into the weeds, what I'd like to brainstorm is around this idea of this sort of experts. So we have a number of different expert communities. We have GIS Corps, and we have Standby Task Force, and Humanity Road, and many more. But I want to brainstorm around the idea of how could they be better leveraged or used to do things that haven't been done yet. In the sense that I noted, this morning there's a lot of kind of common concerns. There's maybe a wish list that that the humanitarian community has with respect to these groups. And so how could we imagine, in terms of where technology is and how all of this is moving forward, how these groups could be better leveraged? So, for example, there was discussion this morning around the problems of rumors surfacing on Twitter, and that, yes, there's a self-correcting thing that happens when people start retweeting, no, that's a rumor, ignore, but the problem is that gap, right? And so the thing that I started thinking about was, okay, well, how do we accelerate this sort of error correction? And is there a way to leverage volunteer technical communities as an interesting sort of midway between crowds and sort of an interface between formal organizations and crowds? Is there any way that they could be accelerators to help correct that bias faster or to be better at that sort of thing? We know that volunteers can be used to collect data. They can act as filters. They can help maybe overcome some problems of big data and having too much data, so you're sort of outsourcing some of this to other people that might be able to pitch in for veracity. But maybe there's a way in which we talked about this gap between threat perception and the reality of the threat. Like maybe there's a way we could leverage these communities to help close that gap. Or maybe there's a way that we can help create more positive social norms on the internet itself, right? Norms on Twitter that, okay, it's better to, especially during a major crisis. I mean, maybe this is too idealistic, I don't know, but, to sort of deliberately, systematically, consciously try to create positive social norms such that, all right, this is a time when maybe we shouldn't be tweeting about, like, Justin Bieber's haircut as much as, letting people kind of tweet other things. I don't know. And some of the other ideas that I just wanted to throw out there is, if we had such a brainstorm, who would be the champion of this brainstorm, right? Who would maintain and document and keep it going, curate it, if you will? How are those leaders sort of identified in this amorphous community? And who has the bandwidth? And then I'm also thinking about the future, and our volunteer technical communities like Crisis Mapper, Standby Task Force, and others, are we just sort of a temporary thing that will eventually dissolve because advances in technology and automated design will sort of overtake that? And so we're kind of filling this gap? Or is there always going to be a space? And then thinking about changes in technology with respect to the interface and the user experience and having data overlaid on top of our world. So we can see, your name hovering here so that we don't forget there's no such thing as forgetting anyone's name or where I last met you and this kind of thing. If we imagine where technology is headed and how this data is going to be more and more integrated and geospatial and immersive, will it just be sort of a taken for granted end of conversation thing, or are we going to have whole new questions along the lines of networks and hierarchies and interfaces and volunteers? So I'm thinking from a very conceptual, random way, just trying to say something new I haven't said before to all of you. But thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Jen. Nice description of potentially crowdsourcing our analysts. I often get asked this question, don't you just, can we give you some money, find a technological solution, and you can fuse all public health data together for a situation, not just awareness, but assessment. And obviously people in this room are going to smile, but there's people outside of this room who don't smile. And if that was true, our intelligence agencies would have solved it, right? Instead, they're busy hiring a bunch of analysts. That gray matter fusion still matters. It really is a big integral component. And thank you also for the thought, and this will be a good question for the audience here, of what is that fora for collaborative products, not just interactions and discussions such as this, but actually put things in place. Yeah. Jeff?
Hi, I said I'm a local emergency manager, and about the summer of 2009, my mayor instructed me to get on social media, and that was a big thing for me. And I did, and I tried to learn and find colleagues and supportive voices and people that are a heck of a lot smarter than me to tell me what this was all about and how it fit into emergency management. And I've been actively and passionately pursuing that ever since. It's an important kind of a benchmark for me to mention, because I took the approach, and we took the approach, that we would establish these social media platforms, and that we would engage the community. We would use the social media platforms to fill information voids. We would use it to provide preparedness information, certainly threat and hazard information when there was a red flag warnings or a variety of different threats, winter storms, etc., and began doing that. And shortly thereafter started to realize that there was a small but fledgling community of like-thinking people that did the engagement strategies and at least wanted to visit the idea of social media integration into emergency management. About a year later, it was after actually a point of disappointment with a national organizations conference that there was no social media tie-in, no ability to interact like we're having people interact today, and really no community around it, that we decided to create a common hashtag and an initiative, if you will, called SMEM, and that was in 2010. So it's not even 2 years yet. It seems like it's been around forever, and people that find it more lately think it's been around forever, but it's really still in its infancy. But I tell you that just so that you know that as an emergency manager for a small community, 6,000 people and 4.5 square miles, completely surrounded by the city of Albuquerque, I tapped into something, because my followership and my interaction and my engagement went way beyond that. And I tried to sustain that and realized very quickly that if and when I have a major emergency or disaster that impacts me, I cannot be punching the keyboard. I cannot be sustaining that level of engagement that I had created. So I'm an ops guy. I figure what are the objectives here? What resources do I need to fulfill those objectives? Monitoring, engagement, archiving, things we've heard here today. I realized that I wouldn't be able to do it because I'm going to be running operations and doing the normal emergency operations role. So I operationalized this thing called Virtual Operations Support, a VOS, and made it a team concept, and recruited what I call trusted agents, people that I have interacted with, people near and far, and realized that they would work for me in a team construct, focused on objectives that I set, and very diligently be force multipliers for me. And so I'm working very hard at that for 18 months or so, and trying to build out the idea, the concept, evangelize it a little bit, but certainly demonstrate it. I realized that it wasn't enough for me to build something, but to be able to demonstrate it was quite important. And so around about this time last year, Chris Erickson pops off on Twitter saying, what about this virtual operations support thing? I've got a fire in Oregon and I want to do it. And so Chris and I have been attached at the hip ever since, both evangelizing and doing this concept. But why do it? Well, because we have set expectations, and our communities actually have greater expectations than we've even set for the ability to receive timely information, to provide information, to be responded to when they have a question, concern, or if they say, no, your information's inaccurate. But to visit them in the space that they're in Facebook, Twitter, Google+, blog world, in the world, not through some obscure pipelines of information that we used to think was good enough by pressing a button that we've informed the public. So it's been an extraordinary little journey. We did a 19-day sustained operation on a fire in Oregon last year, and thought it actually was worth replicating. Had the pleasure of working with people from Project Epic to not let us write a paper that was cheerleading, but to have an academic view of what we did, gave them all of our data. That paper is available, and I encourage anybody that's interested in the concept to take a look at it. And then I've been evangelizing and working with people with like minds on a leadership coalition, loose coalition of just about anybody who's interested in the idea, practicing the idea, overcoming odds in actually implementing it. But for me, virtual operations support teams are and should be attached to an emergency management entity. And I use that very, very broadly, but so an incident management team should build their own capacity, their own trusted agents, their own coordination protocols, et cetera, their own sets of objectives and leaders' intent. Emergency management agencies, I think, can and should do that, and that's the message I carry out, that it's your trusted agents, it reflects your operational mentality and your expectations, and that there isn't really a one-size-fits-all yet. Now, of course, in the coalition, we talk about having standards and typing and mutual aid and everything. Is that my thought is, at least in my mind, we're not there yet. But I think that's why I'm here, specifically to talk about the fact that the public, our communities, are not burdens. They're resources, and they're further down the road than we are, and they're nothing to fear. And they will correct us, and we often need correction, and they will provide us information that we can't get, at least in my shop, where it's very resource poor, we can't get without their eyes. And they will learn about emergency management, and they will learn about preparedness if we engage, and they will go there with us. And the last anecdote I'll give is that we've got a virtual operations support team operating right now. And a little shout out to the PNW3 VOS supporting a team working the Wenatchee complex in Washington. And just this morning, on a platform that was built for informing the community around that fire complex, there was a question: which fire is causing the smoke in the valley this morning? And within moments, the VOS captures that, asks the information shop for an official response. There is an inversion keeping the smoke from all the fires from lifting to 5,000 feet. So that's a question in, answer out. And in terms of measurement, I might just ask, how many phone calls were not made to the information office at the fire because there was a known place to get an answer to that question, and people are consuming that Facebook page and that Twitter stream. So can you measure a negative? But that's the question. But for fire information or any information shop, when you publish that number and it's just ringing off the hook, well, did we reduce the volume? Probably. Can we measure it? I'm not sure, and that's a challenge Chris and I talk about all the time. But thank you, and be happy to talk more offline or as the hour progresses. Oh,
I'm sure this audience isn't shy. Thanks, Jeff, for the field perspective. Sarah?
Okay. Well, you guys might think you're looking at us trying to work out what to do with us, but we're actually looking at you trying to work out what to do with you too. So I think we have, I've read the brief and put some notes together in all of 3 minutes. So I think we have 5 groups that as volunteers we tend to engage with. There's the agencies themselves, there's the other crisis mapping groups, there's the technology volunteers, the crisis volunteers, and the public. And each of them has a different slant on how we talk to them, what we do with them. So agencies, pretty much every agency we start working with starts thinking we're a bunch of amateurs. Hey, they'll be useful, they'll feed us some data. And then they suddenly realize that actually we know something. And that knowledge is born of a lot of time, a lot of deployments, a lot of experimenting, trying to get it right, trying to get the connections to agencies right. Because in the beginning, there were hundreds and hundreds of different volunteers all trying to talk to the same person at once in the field. So it's taken a while to work out the communication. It's taken a while to gain trust. And we get that trust because we do things like verification. We're very careful about the information we let through, the types of information we let through, about how we cross-check it. We're careful about how we put out information, whether it's on maps, whether it's on curated maps, whether it's as analysis reports. So we take our time on that. We're not just a bunch of people who turn up during a crisis. We actually work with agencies in between too. So at the moment, we're starting to look much, much more about things like background data. So what is the information you need going into an area? Where is it? How can we help you release it? How do you get it out of those messy PDFs and scruffy bits of paper into a form that you can hit a button and get what you need? How do we match that in with the maps that we produce? I guess bottom line is we're not a bunch of amateurs. we are a very mixed bunch, and we work from everybody from grandmothers to routers to people in shops and experts in their fields, all mixed in here. So one of the other connections we have is between the different groups. So yeah, it's funny that most of us belong to at least 3 or 4 different groups, but that's because we have different skills that fit those different groups. So I'm not going to use the mentoring skills that I use at Geeks Without Bounds, mentoring new technology projects over at the Standby Task Force where I'm leading up teams. Or Humanity Road, where I'm just one of the volunteers. As Jen said, sometimes you're just one of the guys on the ground typing stuff in. The other people we tend to work with are the technology volunteers. Now, they're very, very switched on already because they've had decades of working with open source software. And open source software is all about community, all about getting whole groups of people to work together towards a common aim, a common product. If you haven't got it, go read John O'Bacon's Art of Community. Wonderful, wonderful book about how to, yeah, okay, I got a thumbs up, it worked. And some of the guys with UAVs are getting together as well and getting that connected. People like Open Relief are starting to form, which is why you need things like the Digital Humanitarian Initiative. So there are starting to be these meta clusters where the leads on each group meet and are activated through a common conduit. The crisis volunteers, they turn up because they care. First, they tend to turn up because of some form of connection. Either they're connected in some way to the teams that are out there. In my way was I just organised a bar camp with somebody who was interested in disasters, and we just ended up crisis mapping together. And it just went on from there. We just pulled in more techs. Other people because they're connected directly to the crisis. So we've still got people from Haiti who were helped during Haiti and have carried on helping with crises afterwards, who will just turn up and say, what can we do? So you get the payback, which is nice. The things I think personally I've learned, and we've got 2 deployments coming up, so we're busy trying to get volunteers on those deployments. We've got the Kenyan elections on Monday, and then we've got a longer dated deployment afterwards. Talking to people personally is good. If you can talk to somebody face-to-face, if you can connect with them, even if it's through a Twitter hashtag, or as today with the ats, face-to-face is even better. So if you can run meetups, if you can run any form of event where people come and talk to you and find out what you're doing, and then keep them engaged, just monthly, just get talking to them. Getting local information is good. Getting to local people. I mean, for Pakistan, we literally went round the corner to the local grocery store because we knew the local grocery store was run by Pakistani people and said, okay, where are the local communities here? Get them in, get them helping us map. Being proud of your organization. If you've got a well-run organization, if it's an organized deployment and people know their contribution to it, they will keep coming back. Now, being proud of not just the organization they're part of, the deployment they're part of, but of their own contribution to it too. And thank you. Always say thank you. It's the most valuable thing you can ever do is to thank your volunteers. Oh, and yeah, bottom line, nobody ever says, but a lot of the work that we do is boring as hell. Okay, I've said it now. So a lot of the things that are helpful and a lot of things we're doing with the tech are trying to automate some of the drudge work out so that people are doing the things that they're good at. I don't believe there will ever be a pure tech solution. I spent years trying to build pure tech solutions to this sort of problem, and it doesn't happen. You need both. You need people plus tech together, always. But you better use each for the thing they're good at, otherwise the people will drift. The people will just go sod it and go. We can hold a lot together because we build societies of people. So it's not just you turn up, you do a little bit. There's actually chat rooms running all the time. There are people talking to each other all the time whilst they do it. That keeps going. That's how you get your volunteers and how you keep your volunteers. There's also the public. So a lot of what you start talking about is listening passively to what the public's saying. You want to go verify with them sometimes. Sometimes you want to talk to them, find out what's actually going on. Sometimes if you're social media emergency, you actually need to give them permission to talk to you. Don't underestimate that. Sometimes you have to go say it's okay to tell us stuff. There's a barrier. You've got to get past that barrier. Stringers are great. Old media trick of having trusted sources embedded in your space. So if you can build up those sources, if you can build up connections with your local media, for instance, then you've already got conduits for high-value information that you can start bringing through. Again, get creative. If you're working in bits, say Africa, there are a lot of technology hubs springing up. And it's worth finding people like the iHub, finding people like WUGNet in Uganda, just groups of people who are connected, technically able, social media able, and already on the ground. OpenStreetMap is great at that, by the way. They're good people to learn from. And bottom line is privacy and security are always, always important in this. You've got to think about the effects of what you're doing. So, yeah. And I think, Jen, to your, whether this is temporary or not, I think there'll always be something like this going on, but perhaps a lot of the core work will shift into almost not necessarily emergency services, more like a Red Cross function. You'll start seeing people whose work is the data of crises.
So
and yeah, I'm done.
Thanks. Perfect timing. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for reminding us that technology is a new tool for standard issues, which is about building a community. And you were very eloquent about that. Why don't we turn this over to questions? No? You can't be the first one. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. We have one in the far behind you, far back on the left.
This isn't a question so much as maybe just to kind of emphasize one of the points that Sarah just made that I think is important. The recent crowdsourcing experiment that USAID ran that I think went really well, in part came from the fact that I volunteer for the organizations that I was using, so I kind of automatically understood them culturally. And we tried to capture as much of that as we could, again, in the case study that's available online, so people would understand. But I think her opening remark that a lot of times volunteer organizations aren't sure how to engage with big agencies or big entities is really, really important, right? Any governmental apparatus automatically has to aggregate. It has to sort of forget about the individual and aggregate lots of information up to try and make sense. That's just a tension about trying to make sense of large amounts of information coming in. While a volunteer is an individual trying to make sort of a contribution that they think is important. So I think that addressing that and understanding that little bit of cultural tension in between how a volunteer technical organization might work and an agency might work is really important. And that as much time as we spend on saying, writing case studies or writing papers about here's how you interact with VNTCs, we should also be saying here's how volunteers can interact with us. And here's how volunteers can try and make more sense of the way our organization works. And talks like this are a good start at that, but I just wanted to emphasize that I think that's something we probably haven't done enough of yet as a community and need to do more of.
Actually, my question follows right on from Shadrock's. getting the connection between the volunteer organizations, particularly digital humanitarians, and U.S. government agencies is not easy, either from the Govy side that wants to connect to them or from the volunteer side that's trying to figure out what topology, what map of the things that I need to do and not do are there. I'm wondering, what is the hardest thing that you've encountered in any of the recent crises in creating the interface to one of the U.S. agencies, and if there was a practice to address it, or if it remains open?
For me, intermediaries. You should always have a direct connection, because if you put someone in the middle between you and the agency, between the VTC and the agency, it's going to fail. It's a transmission error, basically.
If I could follow on that, I'm recently going around and I'm talking with a lot of agencies and jurisdictions throughout the country. And when I bring up crisis mapping and digital volunteer communities, and I'm asking a lot of agencies, are you engaging with them? Have you made progress? If you knew that a crisis map was developed for an incident, would you link to it? How would you interface? What would that interface be? I get a wide variety of responses to those questions, where some agencies say, no, we're not going to link to anything, we're not going to import anything in, we're not going to display anything unless it is government created. So there's a barrier in and of itself. Now, I'm starting to hear from people that some agencies are saying, well, yes, we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to linking to it. What we'd want to know is, can we write it into our plan and know that it's going to happen that way and be published there? So this is a major problem that we have in government, is that if we're going to say, yes, we want to work with this volunteer community that has this capability and can do this work, we also want to be able to rely on it to put it into our operational plans, and that's where I think there's a disconnect. It's just it is difficult to get that layer of trust established. And when I've looked at crisis maps, I'm not exactly sure myself what the threshold is for what size of an event. It might be that a local jurisdiction has an incident that is creating all sorts of problems for them that is a very big deal, but it might not meet the threshold of the humanitarian communities that have the resources to do it for very large scale incidents. So there's some natural disconnects. I think more dialogue is definitely needed, and I think it's desired on both ends.
I might have two potential solutions to that. We are lucky in New York in that we have a crisis mappers meetup in New York, which the local emergency managers come to. And we're starting to get dialogue. And it turns out that they have quite a large volunteer pool already. They already have a stringer network who go out and report back through the Open 311 system, which is like the non-emergency 911-ish thing. I'm not that up on American culture yet. So that's a possibility, is to use that existing volunteer source that you have, train it up in these methods, and then you've got your guaranteed collection, your guaranteed people. But that access to them has to come via your end. We can't necessarily get at your volunteers.
Jen, any thoughts about interacting with federal agencies?
For me, the most difficult challenge is imagining what is the ecosystem, and I think it's difficult to communicate that and also to understand that everybody has a different sense of what that looks like. In my view, it's a very highly disaggregated space, so trying to explain to someone whether or not they're engaged in this or not, just this crisis map is being run by Al Jazeera, or this one is being, with Crisis Commons is taking the lead on this one, or there's some standby task force working with 4636, and so it's so disaggregated. And I know there's emerging meta spaces, right, digital humanitarian networks and other ways of sort of activating parts of those community more formally as an interface, and I think those developments are very positive insofar as they can help explain like next steps towards moving toward a common understanding. The fact of the matter is it's still highly disaggregated between and among those developments, and I think that that's sometimes confusing.
That's obviously true in the federal space also. Talking to FEMA is not equivalent to talking to every other component of DHS, right, let alone HHS, DOE, and all the other various entities.
Hi, my name is Shorey Elhami. I'm the co-founder of GIS Core. I have two follow-up comments. Actually, I had one, and then after Shadrach, I'd like to start with that. We worked with USAID on the very recent project, the crowdsourcing project, and the comment that he made about the importance of the partner agency's request and the clarity of it, I cannot emphasize that enough. We now have had over 100 launched missions in the past 10 years, and I can tell you with great confidence that those that we had very clear direction and also responsiveness have been the most successful ones, including the USAID project that Shadrach and I worked very, very closely along with a larger group of volunteers that we had on our team. So that was one follow-up on his comment. But the other comment I wanted to make, that was a follow-up to Jen's comment, which I'm very, very interested to also explore. And I wonder if there are some people in this room who would want to do study on the role of expert crowdsourcers and how we can help bring that level of trust up against the non-expert crowdsourcers and what they feed. How can we really be more effective? We have over 2,800 volunteers in 94 countries that we can utilize to kind of not only train the non-expert clouds, but also kind of verify what they are sending out in many different scenarios, not necessarily in disaster response, but even in other projects that are not directly disaster response. So those were my two comments, and thanks so much for a great panel.
Yeah, my apologies for missing JS Core for the list of people who are here.
Could I speak to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for that question, Shorey. I think it's really important to remember that there's an interesting way in which this sometimes automatically works together quite well, which is to say that experts and crowds, so-called experts and so-called crowds, can work together well because typically I'm more on the crowd part of that equation, right? I have expertise in certain things, but we all can't be experts in everything. And so if I can do something basic like trace a road into Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, that basically frees up the cab driver from Haiti that might be able to name the road because he doesn't also have to draw the road. I don't have the expertise in terms of what is the name of the road, but I can draw it by hand. I can learn how to do this very easily. And I know that's a different kind of thing from GIS, but what I'm saying is that I think there's a way that a lot of this works together well, and I think that it's important, going back to Sarah's point, for people to recognize there's varying levels of expertise in all of these communities, but some of these people are highly trained along any metric that you would ever want to use. So many people in this room are volunteers as well as wearing the hat of working in traditional organizations. So that sort of dichotomy should, I think, break down in our minds when we realize it's many of us actually also volunteering our time insofar as we can.
And thank you for reminding us not to limit ourselves to thinking just about natural disasters, but to consider also pandemics and other events in our communities where these tools are useful, and these concepts of crowdsourcing information and analysts will be very valuable for us as a community. Eric?
Thanks, Eric Rasmussen. Can we go back to something Laurie said earlier and revisit a more general approach to the question of thresholds for events at which volunteers are going to appear, and how that indecision leads to an inadequacy in prior planning, prior training, and a lack of integration into response plans?
Well, I certainly, as I've mentioned, I've seen and I've heard the hesitation that comes from a lot of agencies on that aspect. And from my experience working in Seattle, where you recognize what your hazards are, you do your hazard identification vulnerability assessment, then you identify your plans and your concept of operations and what is your staffing levels going to be if X, Y, or Z happen. Then you exercise and then you train and you find where the gaps are, and it's a huge cycle, and that's what our normal day-to-day staffing goes towards, is in an emergency management plan. So when we know that there are these volunteer communities out there that are wonderful resources, that level of engagement that has to happen throughout every single phase that I just described of identifying, what are the hazards? Is it on their radar? Could they help us be sensors of things that are happening? All the way through all those cycles of developing the plans and exercising the plans. I like to use the example of in an emergency operations center that's managed by an agency. We often have opened the doors to ham radio operators. We train with them in advance. We have them as part of our incident command system on scenes if they have to provide communications. And they have become a regimented part of the concept of operations. I have not seen that translate into other volunteer type capabilities. We have CERT teams, and those have more structure to them than what we're talking about in this aspect of digital volunteer communities. So I think there's ground, and there's other models we could look at to do that. We just need to prioritize that. And yes, as far as thresholds, the thresholds for an incident in one community can be very different than the threshold of a large-scale incident in another. It could be snow. I'm from Seattle. We had a very large snowfall that crippled our city. We have tons of hills, and we had a mayor who refused to put salt on the roadways. So, whatever snow stuck, stayed. And, that was a huge issue. Garbage couldn't get picked up. People couldn't get their meds. Everything, all commerce shut down. That was a huge, major incident. Now, is 8 inches of snow going to be a major issue somewhere else back east or further up north? Probably not. So the regional differences of what those threshold incidents might be are very different too.
2 fingers.
Yeah.
Student, if you want a question, 3 fingers next time.
I want to follow up on what Laurie said, because 14 years ago I became an operational support team member in King County.
Okay.
Going into the EOC as a volunteer and helping out run the EOC, doing pretty much every position in the EOC except the incident command. And this is something that we have seen. I come from Iceland. We have 4 people in the whole country paid to do emergency management. Rest are all volunteers. That includes operational support staff and everything else. Using volunteers as part of our operations as emergency managers is not something new. And the only difference we're talking about here are they are not necessarily present within our operation centers, okay? And we have unfortunately not seen enough of what Jeff was talking about, the virtual operation support teams. I think what we need is having those kind of teams locally, or at least in your region, to start with. Have some people that you have a good relationship with, you have trained, you have set the objectives and everything else that you're talking about. Then if things scale up so that all of a sudden, you're faced with a 9.0 earthquake in Seattle and it's way beyond what your local support team can help you with, that's when you reach out to the Standby Task Force and the Digital Humanitarian Network, and you scale it up. This same applies not just here in the U.S., but in disaster-prone developing countries, because the response that OSHA does is, 1/100th or 1,000th of the disasters that each one of those countries is facing on a daily basis, and we need to have their ability to support their local governments.
That was the original crisis camp model. Local camps which called in people from regions that worked very, very well in South America for a while. It worked very, very well where we're starting camps. We have to work out, as a community, how to start that again.
Just real quick, just to emphasize that point. I mean, I was fascinated by Crisis Commons and Haiti and the whole idea of really smart people willing to do heavy-duty work on our behalf. So the threshold question has always been right at the fore of my mind. And it was also the answer to that question that led me to build my own capacity. The answer is it's not going to happen in Los Ranchos. It's not going to happen in Albuquerque for our run-of-the-mill stuff. And I need it for the run-of-the-mill stuff so that we have capability for when the bad stuff happens. And even if even the bad stuff that can happen and will happen in Albuquerque area is not going to rise to the threshold, rise to the level of the wonderful stuff that I've been hearing about. So I built my own, and I encourage other EMs to do the same.
Kate?
Okay, Kate Starbird, University of Washington researcher. There's a couple of themes, and I have a question, and I want to just mention a couple of these themes and tie them together. So we're talking about some use of expert volunteers, and then and relying on an expert group as people get more expertise. We're also talking about this negotiating of what events we should respond to, and I've been in the Skype chat rooms watching people try to decide whether we can respond to this event or respond to that event. A lot of these communities could respond to any event in the world, so that changes. I mean, we used to have volunteer communities, but they can only respond physically to the places they are. You could respond to 6 events a day, you know, if you really think about it, if you're a digital volunteer. And so I begin to think about sustainability. The sustainability of these communities. Even the VOS group, I know, we're getting exhausted over the summer. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on sustainability, both in the short term, and it might actually be a different solution in the long term. So maybe compare those two.
I can speak to that briefly. I think the importance is to always have a new pool of volunteers. And I think this is where we haven't completely tapped the potential of our students, right? I'm a university professor, and our students are really the next generation of experts and leaders in this space. They want to get their hands on. And so I think it's about train-the-trainer models. It's about, you know, kind of bringing them into the fold, getting them experience in, say, some standby task force deployments, and then having them take the lead on various teams and going on in the future. I often speak of standby task force because I've had at least my eye in their rooms more often than the others. So we speak about what we know. But I would say that that's one thing, but that this question of sustainability is forefront in my mind as well. You know, how do you even thank them in any way that's beyond thank you when you don't even have a budget? And, you know, you can't even buy them a $20 gift card at Target. And, you know, sometimes these are the same people that often can't pay rent. I mean, because you have a various different kind of communities. So what does it mean they stayed up all night doing 10 hours of work, and you know that the first of the month is coming and they have other concerns. So I think it's an important question.
I think we're at the middle of what's likely to be quite a long journey. I don't believe personally that what we do now is going to be what we do in 5 years' time. I'm not convinced we can run this entirely off volunteers forever. There has to be a shift in the whole space. There has to be that technology backbone that takes out the drudge work, the absolutely repetitive work that people do now because we don't have the systems to do it. There has to be that focus from the people who need the information. And there also has to be that start of conversation about the professionals who will do part of this work. I think there will always be volunteers. There will always be a need for surge capacities. So for having a large number of people you can call on to cover. But I don't think we can do this forever.
We're working each event. We're up, 10, 12, 15, principally fires, but other smaller things. We're trying to expand the pool. And for me, the most important way to expand the pool is to look to your existing organizations like Medical Reserve Corps, the Citizens, the CERT, the Amateur Radio, existing pools. That's one way. But each time we have an event, somebody bring another person, and we have them at least have the chance to observe, to see if it's their sort of thing, see what tools they bring to the game. A lot of smart people that have never even heard of emergency management are fantastic VOST members and do wonderful work. But if we just expand the pool, and as we have more and more formal VOSTs, the ability to trade, to share resources, and we're working on that through the VOST Leadership Coalition. But we've got to expand the pool because we are getting tired.
Can I put one last thing? I've just been corrected by internet. The team is watching this, and they've just reminded me that Gen students, NYU, SIPO, and Fletcher students have all signed up for our next 2 deployments. So we do have that rotation coming through. Sorry, guys, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
You've been waiting patiently.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to mention the fact that with I agree. Oh, here it is. I agree so much with what Jen said about the volunteers and the motivation and the dedication that they have. They're facing a lot of struggles. It's all part of the public responding to an event. And motivation in this type of work, when it comes to cognitive skills, it's shown that most volunteers are not motivated by financial rewards. They're motivated by self-mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And with a common purpose and that mastery together, that is their form of self-actualization and self-realization as far as getting better and becoming that expert in social media. These are the people who are coming back and returning. But I just wanted to make a comment that we need to limit their time online, because we try to tell them no more than 4 hours on any given event, because it is emotionally draining. However, even with the Libya crisis map with Standby Task Force, I wanted to give people an idea of the size of this. Last year we did, I think, 17,000 hours of service. The volunteers contributed to this effort for Humanity Road. In any given event, though, you can get by with 3 to 20 volunteers, and quite effectively, in managing that data coming through. So I wanted to let the govies know that it doesn't mean you have to staff in a big, big way. It really doesn't. And also, when it comes to terms of service, we do operate under MOUs. So we can do terms of service or MOUs if that's what they need for activating. I just wanted to make that comment. We have a question on the on Twitter from the Fru group. They agree with Palin on the shift that's needed, and I think Laurie and Leuven mentioned the point. How are protocols for the volunteer and technical communities, virtual operations support teams, and the crisis mappers now being incorporated into the ICS and the ConOps?
I'll speak directly. I'm an ops guy. I'm an ICS guy. Everything I do is born and has a label of the concepts and principles of ICS. And so the team idea is no different than a debris team or any other team to fulfill an objective. And we use incident command system forms and processes in our coordination, and it's all behind the scenes. You don't see it out on the public Twitter sphere so much, but that's how we've done it. But again, that's the advantage, or at least that, my emphasis of having the emergency management entity build it, because then it is going to operate according to those protocols.
Can I add that a map is not an objective? It's a means to an objective, which is better awareness.
I think that in general, when you are in an activated scenario, situation for an incident within a government setting or a jurisdictional area, the situational awareness unit is going to be the one that is trying to capture and get understanding and try to interpret that for leadership that then has to make decision making. Now the challenge or the two different pathways we have here is a lot of the crisis maps that I've seen are out there publicly. And a lot of what I've heard emergency management entities talking about is we want a common operating picture. We want to be able to bring that information in and have it behind the walls of the Emergency Operations Center so that we can add our own little commentaries and determine what our plan of, how to incorporate it into our missions and how it will affect our objectives. And I think that what is really critical for, and hopefully this panel to be discussing and talking about, is volunteers are great, they're one layer, but we have a fully sustainable whole public out there that has data points that potentially could be brought in and be represented on a map. And I have this desire, I have this wish list of a type of a map that I would love to be able to use that has GIS layers of official information. Where is the parameter of the fire line or of the flood area? What areas overlaid with what is the evacuation areas? And overlaid with where are the shelters that are actually set up and located? And then be able to toggle back onto the unofficial type information. Where are the photographs photographs that people are capturing that show damages? Where are the roads actually closed that they can't get through when they're trying to get their kids to school? Which schools are actually closed, and what are the impacts from that? Which trees are down that are obstructing? So those are not typically things that we look at in emergency management, but all of those layers of information and data that can be mapped visually would have value to the public as a whole that lives in a community that is struggling with all of the hardships and impacts of some type of an emergency or disastrous event. So I think there needs to be that merged capability of what can we provide with official sources of GIS and data layers, and then how do we input on top the information of sensors in the field from the public that have perspectives and visual and eyewitness capabilities that are unending. They are not going to get burnt out by being a volunteer that gets called on too often.
The thing you've missed there is that that data doesn't come packaged beautifully and geolocated.
Sure.
A lot of what we do is finding out just where it is, labeling it, putting it into categories.
Totally understand, absolutely.
There's a process there.
Right. I said that was my wish list. I didn't say I thought it was out there yet.
Let me make a comment here. I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. Right. So there will always, the federal government and other entities will have certain, not mutually exclusive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
we did that in Libya.
Right, exactly.
There's a difference between fear and caution as well. I mean, there's certain things you do because you need to, because it's prudent, and there's certain things that are done by government entities that are strictly out of fear or lack of interest in engaging the community. And we still have to overcome that at some fundamental level too.
Liberate data and share data. You've been very patient there in the back.
Yeah, BK DeLong, technology consultant and disaster services volunteer. Has anything been done or thought about people who cannot be on the ground as disaster services volunteers, and then actively mentioning the opportunity to be a digital volunteer? Because there are, and I'm ashamed to say it, I have not heard of some of the other opportunities like Humanity Road and VOST and things like that. But I'm still fully aware, having gotten my training after Katrina, of everything going on with American Red Cross and FEMA ICS and everything there. But as an active technology consultant and information security practitioner, I actually don't know of any of these other organizations except for Geeks Without Borders.
And so that speaks to what I think Jen was very eloquent about a disaggregated space with various players that have capabilities that may not be known to other parts of the community, and what is a potential solution to that. Others who want to comment on that? I
would just say that I think where I have spent the most time and I have had the most benefit is simply on the Twitter hashtag of SMEM. That's one space where you can ask questions, but also offer assistance and find out who's doing what. Maybe even get slapped around a little bit.
That does happen.
There you go.
Putting on my old urban search and rescue hat, within the international urban search and rescue community, we've been wondering about what to do when the next Haiti happens with regards to all the reports that will come in over social media. And we've put together an operational guidance note to all of the international teams out there about how to do that, and within the UN how we do that. And it's very simple. We activate the standby task force to help us kind of go through and geotag the information and so on.
You're going to need more than just the SPTF.
I know, we will activate everybody. But to follow up on the last comment, one of the key things that we thought into that plan was whenever even a big disaster like Haiti happens, there are going to be teams and specialists, urban search and rescue specialists, that are not being sent into that country. Leveraging them virtually as members of that team can be really, really, really effective. So in other words, when there's not something happening down in Los Ranchos, Jeff can be a fantastic guy knowing exactly how to prioritize certain things and do things, because that's what he does on a daily basis. But guess what? There's nothing happening down there except sunshine and you know, beautiful weather.
Balloons
and things. So now we can leverage him, and I think that's one of the keys. We talked about students earlier, but we should also think about how do we leverage the experts that are not deploying to do work with us, and not just think about, you know, the small community we currently have.
And diasporas.
Hi, I'm Michael Grisalfi. I'm a senior advisor at FEMA in the Whole Community Initiative, and I'd like to follow up on something Sarah Jane Farmer brought up, which is looking out a few years and how can we start to formalize perhaps and change this equation and build partnerships. First of all, as has been mentioned, you know, Administrator Fugate and Deputy Administrator Serino are very much into getting new ideas, and I would really, first of all, challenge everyone who hasn't used our FEMA think tank or idea scale to really throw in some suggestions, because they actually personally read them. I wanted to just give you two vignettes to think about. One of them is within our Office of External Affairs, particularly in the private industry sector. I have seen an amazing collaboration develop over the last few years that could potentially be a template for this group. What started out with certain cities really building emergency operations centers focused on their businesses has now matured into a national emergency operations center business community that we actually used for the first time during Isaac, and I see immense collaboration with private industry. What I'm just sharing is an evolution and that we should be looking at as a template. Secondly, just today, FEMA inducted the first FEMA Corps group, which is 240 people down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and this is again an example where FEMA, collaborating with the Corporation for National and Community Service, is creating this new partnership that's really focused on engaging youth in the response and recovery disaster arena. So I think as we proceed here and we're looking how we're going to become more mature as a larger body, we do also need to look out 3 or 5 years and say, how the heck can we create organizations that transcend public-private NGO, that are more sustainable, that maybe have better incentives built into them. And maybe, as I've heard, since a lot of the leaders in this community are starting to coalesce themselves, they might take that on as one of their objectives, bring all of these different disparate communities together and think about how to engage not just FEMA, you know, I do have a US-centric perspective, but equivalents in other countries as well. Thanks.
We're starting to, it's taking time. I mean, I keep saying about having local meetings, but that really is the big one that helps a lot. Yeah, I can vouch for Craig Fugate. I got a bit surprised to see him CC'd on emails to me recently about some of my tech work, but he does seem to be engaged.
He's engaged.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the robust discussion, which will continue, including some of the, I hope some of the operational details. I guess this sort of, yeah, many of us have an operational background in terms of thinking about how do we better use volunteers and what are the correct fora to work on projects together.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Sorry, we'll have a quick coffee break here. I do want to make one quick point here as we think about volunteers. Much of the work that we tried to do, I suppose I should put this on for the web audience. Much of the work that we tried to do has been looking at what's new. America has a 200-year-old tradition of building barns. A lot of that work was not done by volunteers, or I should say that some of the core expertise was actually done by experts brought into the community to provide joinery and to provide services around the core bits of the barn that actually are quite difficult to do and require specialized skills. It took us 200 years to figure that out. Hopefully it will take us a lot less time with the crowds. Have a good coffee.